One Hail Mary, 53 words, said quickly, said slowly, said in a hospital room, said in a car, said half awake before sleep takes you. It doesn't matter. That single prayer carries more weight than the entire visible world suspects. Padre Pio saw this, not as a comfort he offered to frightened pilgrims, but as a fact he had watched with his own eyes, or rather, with something deeper than eyes. He witnessed what happens the moment those words leave your lips. He saw where they go. He saw what they do. And what he saw would change the way you finish your next one. Most people treat the Hail Mary the way they treat breathing. Something that happens, something useful in a crisis, something too familiar to take seriously. But Padre Pio's spiritual sight showed him that familiarity has nothing to do with power. A single prayer, said with even a fragment of real faith, sets something in motion that cannot be undone. Something moves, something responds, and the soul on the other end of that prayer, whether alive or dead, whether close to God or years away from Him, is never quite the same after it arrives. He was not a man who used gentle words when he could use true ones. He spent 10, 11, 12 hours a day inside a wooden confessional in San Giovanni Rotondo, a monastery perched on a hill in southern Italy, surrounded by dust roads and olive trees, and the constant sound of people waiting. He bore the wounds of Christ in his hands and side for 50 years. He suffered things that had no natural explanation, but what set him apart from every other holy man of that century was not the wounds or the crowds or the miracles reported at his door. It was what he could see. The friars who lived alongside him over decades spoke of a man who seemed to be watching two worlds at once, this one and the one immediately behind it. He saw souls. He saw what pressed against them from the dark, and no prayer held his attention the way the Hail Mary did, because no prayer in his experience crossed the distance between worlds quite so fast. What he perceived across years of prayer and spiritual sight was something that sounds almost too simple to believe. When a soul prays a Hail Mary, something opens. Not a door, exactly. More like a wound in the distance between heaven and earth. And through that wound, a presence passes. Those who tried to record his descriptions spoke of light, but not the kind that illuminates a room. The kind that enters a person. The kind that finds the cold places inside a soul and sits there, patient, like an ember placed against frozen wood. That is what a single Hail Mary does. Even one. Even said quickly. Even said poorly. The prayer is not a performance, it is a call. And she answers every single one. Think of it this way. In the invisible world, the way Padre Pio seems to have perceived it, every prayer from a human soul appears as something like a thread, fine and bright and surprisingly strong. Most threads are gathered into great ropes by repetition, by the rosary, by decades of faithful habit. But even a single thread matters. He once told a woman, during one of those long mornings in the confessional, while the line outside stretched down the monastery steps into the cold air, that she should not despise the prayer she had said the night before. She had prayed a single Hail Mary for her dying mother, half asleep, without much feeling in it. She thought nothing of it. According to those who were present that morning, Padre Pio told her to say it again, because it had already arrived. It had already been received. She heard it, he seemed to tell her. She is holding it already. This is what his gift showed him. The Hail Mary is not a message sent into silence. It reaches a person. Mary is not a symbol or a memory or an inspiring figure from the distant past. She is alive. She is present. And in Padre Pio's understanding, she responds to each prayer the way a mother responds when her child calls her name in the dark. Not eventually, immediately. That single thread, that single prayer. She takes it into her hands and carries it directly to her son. The distance that seems impossible from our side costs her nothing. She crosses it the moment the prayer leaves your lips. Now, what does grace look like when it arrives? This was something Padre Pio was reluctant to describe in plain terms. He preferred to guide people through its effects rather than explain its mechanics. But those who listened to him over years built up a picture from everything he said. Small descriptions, offhand comments, instructions given with unusual force. And what they understood was that he was describing something very specific. A soul in darkness does not become bright all at once. The Hail Mary does not perform a sudden cure. What it does is more particular than that, and in some ways more wonderful. Picture a soul that has been closed for years, not dramatically closed, not the great shut door of someone who has made a deliberate choice against God. Just slowly, quietly closed, the way a house closes when no one has opened the windows in a long time. A little darker each season, a little more airless. The soul keeps functioning, keeps living, doesn't notice what has been lost. Then someone, a mother, a friend, a stranger who doesn't even know this particular soul by name, says one Hail Mary, and somewhere in that closed house, a window opens. Just a crack, not enough to flood the rooms with light, just enough that air moves, just enough that something cold and stale inside shifts, and the soul, without knowing why, without any dramatic interior experience, feels something loosen. Grace slips in. The window was opened by a prayer the person never knew was being said for them. The saints who came before Padre Pio had described something similar. This idea that prayer crosses distances the one praying cannot measure or see. But for him, this was not a doctrine held at arm's length. He had watched it happen. And what moved him most was not the large, obvious transformations. It was the small movements, the nearly invisible shifts, the crack appearing in the glass that had been whole and cold a moment before. He saw those small cracks as extraordinary things, because he knew what they let in. A crack, once open, does not close on its own. Grace, once inside, does not stop working. The Hail Mary that opened the window in the morning is still working by evening. It set something in motion that the person who prayed it will never be able to track, in a life they may never directly touch. Padre Pio understood this as a fact he had seen confirmed so many times that it no longer surprised him, only moved him every time in the same deep way. There is something else in what his spiritual sight showed him about this prayer that has no easy name. He seemed to perceive that the Hail Mary does not only do one thing, it does several things at once, in the way that a single drop of water does several things when it falls. It moves, it spreads, it sinks, it changes the surface it lands on. One Hail Mary said, for a particular person both softens that person's soul and strengthens the angel assigned to guard it. The prayer reaches the soul from one direction and fortifies the guardian from another. The two effects happen simultaneously. He reportedly told certain penitents that when they prayed for someone who had drifted, they were not only reaching toward that person, they were rearming the one already standing at that person's side. The guardian angel of a neglected soul is not abandoned by God, but it works in the dark, without the fuel that prayer provides. One Hail Mary gives it something to carry, something to work with, something it can bring into the interior of the soul it has never stopped protecting. Among the things said of him by those closest to him were accounts of his particular grief and particular hope at the hour of death. He was known to pray intensely for those dying far away. He was sometimes found on his knees in the early hours of the morning with no evident reason, his face drawn with concentration, sometimes wet with tears. The friars who lived alongside him grew used to finding him this way, and they understood, after enough years, that he was attending deaths he could not have known about through any natural means. He was present in some way they could not explain, at bedsides in cities he had never visited. What he witnessed in those moments had to do with the Hail Mary, in a way that shook him to his foundations. The people who die most peacefully, he once suggested in spiritual direction, are not always those who prayed the most during their own lives. Sometimes they are those for whom someone else prayed even a little. A granddaughter saying one Hail Mary at the kitchen table, thinking absently of a grandfather in the hospital across the town. A neighbor lighting a candle and adding one prayer to it without being sure why. These prayers, so small, so unaware of their own power, gathered around a dying soul the way hands gather around something precious that is about to fall. They arrived at the edge of a life. And in that arriving, they did something that could not have been done any other way. He is said to have wept once during Mass in a way that startled the altar servers. A sudden quiet breaking in him, his shoulders dropping forward, his face turned down. When one of the brothers asked him afterward whether something had gone wrong, he shook his head. Something had gone right. A soul had been caught at the last possible moment by a prayer the soul had never expected and could not have asked for. Someone, somewhere, someone with no idea what they had done, had said one Hail Mary. And at the edge of death, it had been enough to change the shape of a person's final minutes, enough for the window to open one last time before the house was left behind forever. Padre Pio's awareness of the souls in purgatory was one of the most documented aspects of his mystical life, and among the least comfortable for modern ears. He spoke of their presence as a daily reality. He prayed for them constantly. He offered his own physical suffering on their behalf. The friars who shared his life reported that he sometimes seemed to be in conversation with presences they could not see, that the monastery at night was not entirely populated by the living. What those who recorded his teaching understood him to convey was that the Hail Mary held a particular power for these souls, different from its power for the living. A soul in purgatory cannot act the way we can. It is fixed. It has seen God clearly enough to know with absolute certainty what it is being purified from. And it waits, not in despair, because it knows it will arrive, but in a state the mystics have always struggled to describe, certain of its destination, unable to hurry the distance, purified by a process it cannot control or accelerate by its own effort. What Padre Pio appeared to perceive was that this waiting has a particular sensitivity to prayer. The soul in purgatory is acutely aware of every prayer that arrives for it from the world of the living. Every Hail Mary sent toward it is felt, not heard the way we hear words, but felt the way warmth is felt by someone who has been standing in cold air for a very long time. Something opens. The distance to God shortens, not because the soul did anything new, but because someone still breathing, still connected to time and choice, still able to act, reached across the gap and pulled. The Catholic tradition has always held that prayer for the dead is among the most powerful acts a living person can perform. Padre Pio did not hold this as doctrine from a distance. He knew it as something he had directly seen. He had watched a soul move closer to God on the strength of a prayer that soul could not have asked for and had not expected. One Hail Mary offered for someone who has died is not merely comfort for the person saying it. It acts on the person it's said for. According to the mystical understanding Padre Pio stood inside, this is not poetry. It is the actual way intercession works. There is one more dimension of this prayer that Padre Pio rarely discussed openly, but which those closest to him understood through his silences and through the physical suffering he sometimes bore without explanation. The Hail Mary is not only an act of tenderness, it is a weapon. He lived every day inside the knowledge that there is a war being fought for every human soul, not a metaphor for interior struggle, an actual war with actual combatants over something with actual and permanent consequences. He had fought in it himself. His cell in the monastery was sometimes the site of disturbances that had no natural explanation, encounters that left him with bruises the friars discovered in the morning. He understood this dimension of reality not from reading about it, but from the inside of it, night after night. And in that war, he had seen the Hail Mary function the way a torch functions in a place that cannot tolerate fire. The darkness retreats, not because it chooses to, because it must. There is something in the words, "Full of grace, the Lord is with you," that what opposes grace cannot remain near. He pressed the Hail Mary on people who seemed to any outside observer to be living entirely ordinary lives, far from any visible spiritual danger. He could see what they could not. He could see what moved around them, what pressed against the edges of their lives from directions they couldn't sense. And he knew that one Hail Mary, even said with a small and imperfect faith, was enough to make that pressure stop, at least long enough for grace to slip inside and do what it had come to do. This is why he insisted on it even for the most faithful souls who came to him. Souls who already prayed, who already lived well, who thought the Hail Mary was something for beginners. He told them it was something for warriors. The most experienced soldier does not put down his weapon because he has learned to fight. He holds it more deliberately, with more understanding of what it is. Padre Pio wanted people to hold this prayer that way, not casually, not mechanically, but with the full knowledge of what they were carrying in their hands every time they said it. Now here is the theological ground beneath every vision, every account, every image this tradition carries. The Catholic faith has always held that Mary's role in salvation is not decorative. She is not placed at the edges of Christian life for souls who prefer a softer path to God. She is the Mother of God, the one who carried in her human body the same Christ whose sacrifice every prayer appeals to. When a soul calls on Mary, it is not bypassing God to find something easier. It is turning to the one who stands nearest to the source of all grace and asking her to bring the prayer directly to her Son. There is no shorter route. The road from your lips to heaven's mercy, in Padre Pio's understanding, ran directly through her hands, and she never made anyone wait at the door. He was not soft about this. He was not gentle with those who came to him complaining that the Hail Mary felt empty, mechanical, dead from too much repetition. He told them to say it anyway. Feeling is not the engine of prayer. Intention is. Even weak intention counts. Even the intention that barely exists, that says the words more from habit than from faith, more from duty than from desire, still sends the thread across. She still receives it. The power of the prayer does not live in your ability to feel it. It lives in what it is. And what it is, precisely, is a request made to a mother by a child. The theology is dense underneath that simple fact, but the reality it points to is simple enough to hold in one hand. Every person who has ever prayed a Hail Mary has done something that required no spiritual greatness from them. They called on a mother. They used the words she herself has asked to hear. They placed themselves for 53 words in the position of a child who knows it needs help it cannot produce on its own. And Mary, whose entire purpose from the moment the angel appeared to her in Nazareth was to bring human beings into contact with her Son, responded. That is not a doctrine Padre Pio invented. That is the most ancient description of what she does. He had simply been given the sight to watch it in real time. This is the hardest truth for a practical mind to accept, that a prayer said without great feeling, without confidence, without any visible result, still does something real on the other side. Padre Pio's whole understanding of grace resisted the idea that prayer only works when it feels powerful. Grace is not a feeling. It is a force. And the Hail Mary, a prayer Mary herself has asked for by name in every one of her documented appearances across the centuries, a prayer that repeats the words of an angel and the words of a saint, carries power that does not depend on the condition of the soul saying it. You do not need to be in your best spiritual shape for it to work. The prayer is not powerful because you are powerful. It is powerful because of who receives it. So here is what Padre Pio seemed to want every person who came to him to carry away. Above everything else he taught about this prayer. You are not too small to change things with it. You may feel as though your prayers are nothing, that the people you're praying for are too far gone, that whatever needed to happen years ago, and the time for intervention has already closed. Padre Pio had watched too many impossible cases resolve unexpectedly to believe any of that. He had seen windows crack open in souls that had been sealed for 20 years. He had seen the dying caught at the final moment by a prayer said in a kitchen, by someone who wasn't even sure why they were saying it. He had seen the suffering of souls in purgatory grow shorter on the strength of one small prayer from one ordinary person who doubted it was worth anything. Say one Hail Mary today, specifically with intention, for one person, not for yourself, for someone who needs something they cannot reach on their own. Someone living, someone dead, someone you've lost contact with, someone who has told you plainly that they don't believe. Say it slowly enough that each word is actually there, not just passed over. Full of grace. Let those 3 words mean something for the moment it takes to say them. The Lord is with thee. Let that be real to you. Blessed art thou among women. You are naming something true about her, not reciting a formula. And blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. That name. Stop inside it for just a second. Padre Pio believed that name, said with even the smallest faith, was the most powerful sound a human mouth could make. And then, Holy Mary, Mother of God. You are calling on someone alive, someone present, someone who has been waiting for exactly this. Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. The prayer is specific about time, not someday. Now, this moment, and at the last moment, the 2 moments that matter most, and Mary is asked to stand at both of them. Notice that the prayer does not ask her to fix everything. It does not demand miracles or dramatic changes. It asks her to pray for us. It asks her to do what she has always done, bring the need of a human soul before the mercy of God. She is not asked to be God. She is asked to be what she already is, the one who stands between our poverty and His abundance, and never refuses to carry what we bring her. Padre Pio knew something about that last word in the prayer, death, that the rest of us know only in theory. He had stood at the edge of it with other souls more times than anyone could count, and he knew that the Hail Mary said during a lifetime is not wasted at the moment of dying. It accumulates. It gathers. Everyone said over years builds something in the invisible world that becomes visible at the last moment. A presence, a company, a mother's hand at the door of the hardest passage any soul will ever make. The person who prays the Hail Mary faithfully during life does not arrive at death alone. Padre Pio had watched this enough times to speak about it without hesitation. In the blunt, certain way he spoke about things he had seen with his own eyes. When you finish, something will have moved. You will not feel it. You may never know what it did or who it reached. But the entire mystical tradition that Padre Pio stood inside, the same tradition the Church has carried without interruption for 2,000 years, holds that the prayer arrived somewhere. It was received. It is already doing something in a place you cannot see, for a soul you may not know is waiting. This is why Padre Pio, a man who had seen more of the invisible world than perhaps anyone else in the 20th century, never once grew tired of the Hail Mary. Not after 50 years. Not after 10,000 repetitions. Each one still crossed the distance. Each one was still received. He knew this not because someone told him, but because he had watched it happen. Again and again, across a lifetime of seeing both worlds at once. He had watched the threads leave human lips and arrive in hands that were already open. He had watched windows crack in sealed houses. He had watched dying souls caught at edges. He had watched the wait in purgatory shorten. And what all of it came down to, what the entire vision pointed to, was something almost too simple to carry the weight it holds. She hears every one. She has never dropped one. And not one of them, not the smallest, not the most hurried, not the ones said with barely any faith left in them, was ever wasted.